Alright, welcome back guys. In this module, we're going to talk all about JavaScript, the language that powers the web. Now, I reckon that I can guess your age based on whether if you recognize this logo. So the people who recognize it, or may have even used it, I reckon that you're probably over the age of 30, or you're just really savvy with your internet history. Now, for those of you guys who don't recognize this symbol, this is the logo for Netscape Navigator, the browser that dominated the 90s. Now, what about these logos? I'm willing to guess that almost everybody will know at least one of these logos, if not all of them. And what do they all have in common? Well, there was one company that invested in all of these startups, and that's Andreessen Horowitz. And the Andreessen in this case refers to Mark Andreessen, who was one of the principal makers of the Netscape Navigator. So in the beginning, way before Chrome or Firefox, Safari, or even Internet Explorer, there was a browser called Mosaic. And Mosaic was something that Mark worked on even while he was at university. And when he finished university, he began to work on Netscape. And at one point, Netscape Navigator held over 80% of the market share in terms of browser usage. Subsequently, there was a huge browser war. And there was a big kerfuffle between Netscape, which was the dominant force, and Internet Explorer. And the result was the death of Netscape and the Netscape Communications Company. But a lot of that technology was transported and incorporated into the modern day Firefox. So when we talk about Mosaic and Netscape, this really was the beginning of web browsing as we know it today. So I want to take you back. We're going to time travel to 1995. And this was the time before Tupac was killed and NSYNC was plastered all over my room, and a time when people would fight each other for the latest version of Windows 95. At this point in time, HTML websites were all form and no function. And when a website did in fact need some functionality, such as retrieving a piece of data that you searched for, or just calculating something, or converting between different units, the website had to send that request to the data server, and it was in the data server where all of this computation and business logic happened, and then it would return the web page that contained the new data. Now, the team at Netscape wanted something a little bit different. They envisioned a future where the web was more dynamic, with animations and real-time user interaction. And in order to enable this, you needed to take away the server and have the code be able to run on the browser. So in order to do this, they wanted to create a small scripting language. The requirements were that this language had to be simple, and it had to be really easy so that even non-developers and non-programmers could use it to add functionality to websites. So they contracted this guy, Brendan Eich, to create that programming language. And as internet history and internet lore goes, Brendan proceeded to sit down with the team, and while there were other people who tried to lose a guy in 10 days, Brendan was able to create JavaScript in 10 days. And now we can't even imagine what the world would look like without JavaScript. So let's try and turn off JavaScript in our Chrome browser and see what we end up with. So if you want to play along with me, you can go into your settings and search for JavaScript, and then it will highlight content settings. And if you click on that, you can navigate to JavaScript allowed, and we're going to switch it off. Now let's go on to Twitter and let's see what that looks like. So we're getting the mobile version of Twitter that doesn't require JavaScript, but you'll see that the design looks completely different from the Twitter that you get on your phone. And also, if you go onto the compose section and you try to write a tweet, you're missing that really key bit of JavaScript that tells you how many characters you've written and how many you have left. So if you tweeted all of this, you'll get some part of your tweet cut off and you won't even be able to know which part. So this is Twitter without JavaScript. Now, if I load up the New York Times while I have JavaScript enabled, you can see that we've got all of these ads showing up. So an interesting side effect of disabling JavaScript is you actually end up having an ad-free website where you can see it's trying to load up the ads, but because it requires JavaScript to do so, we end up with an ad-free browsing experience. So there are even people who choose to switch off JavaScript for reasons such as this. But you'll end up running into a huge amount of problems as well. For example, sites like YouTube just simply won't even load up with JavaScript disabled. And it's the same problem on Netflix. So the world is actually quite a scary place without JavaScript. And it goes to show just how reliant we've become on this single programming language. The web certainly is dominated by it. Now, JavaScript wasn't even always called JavaScript. In fact, when Brendan first created it, it was actually called LiveScript. And then the people at Microsoft decided to try and reverse engineer the program, and they ended up with something called JScript. And so there were all these slightly different versions of JavaScript that was being run on the web, and it was starting to get quite confusing. So the Europeans did what Europeans do best, and they decided to standardize the language. And that's where you get the ECMA script from. And that stands for the European Computer Manufacturers Association script. And the only reason why this is interesting is that often you'll see different versions of JavaScript not referred to as JS5 or JS6, but as ES6 or ES7. And the ES comes, of course, from ECMAScript. All right, so enough history. Why is it called JavaScript anyways? What does the script stand for? Well, just as you have scripts in plays where it tells the actors what they should do, the scripting languages does much the same thing with regards to websites. So, for example, let's say that we have a script and we have some actors, Gwyneth Paltrow and Brad Pitt. So obviously we're making a very high-end movie here. So in the script, you might tell your actors that after Gwyneth appears on stage for 1 second, Brad should appear. And then Gwyneth should say hello. And then there's a delay of 1 second when Brad needs to say hello. So this is the script. So this is how it would play out. So by writing these instructions and telling the actors what they should say, we're able to determine how our play should work. Now, in our world of web development, the script is JavaScript, and the actors are, for example, the HTML elements. And Gwyneth would be, say, for example, an H1 element, and Brad could be a paragraph element. So clearly the web developer's version of a play is much less sexy, but nonetheless, it still can do exactly the same things. So in this case, our script looks more like this. First, unhide H1, then after 1 second delay, unhide the paragraph tag. Then the H1 should change its text to the word hello, and the paragraph tag should change its text to the word world. So let's give that a go. There we go. So in this case, we're using our JavaScript to tell our players or our elements what it should do. And this is how scripting languages work. So the other question that I tend to get from students is JavaScript similar to Java? And what exactly is their relationship? And to those students, I often refer to something that a computer science professor once told me, which is Java and JavaScript have about as much in common as car and carpet. And the only reason why JavaScript was called JavaScript was because in the 90s, the word Java was about as hot as the word blockchain in today's world. And you may or may not have read the story about the Long Island iced tea company, which had its stock double in price almost overnight by simply changing its name to Long Blockchain Company. So that was exactly what happened in the 90s. Everybody wanted the word Java in their name. But JavaScript and Java actually have some big differences. And the main difference is that JavaScript is an interpreted programming language, whereas Java is a compiled programming language. So I'll defer to this brilliant cartoon from a TV show called Bits and Bytes from the 1980s to explain this. It's from a really awesome Canadian series, and I'll include a link to the video in the resources section of this lesson. Now, whereas in the olden days, interpreted languages tend to be seen as almost like toy languages. They weren't so powerful, they were very slow, and they had to execute all the instructions line by line. Whereas compiled languages were seen as the more serious languages, and you end up with very fast running programs. Now, today, modern JavaScript is used in all sorts of places. Whereas traditionally, it was a front-end language that was meant to add some animations to your website or allow a little bit of user interaction. But nowadays, JavaScript can be seen in frameworks ranging from the front end to the back end and everything in between. And later in this course, we're going to learn about a lot of those frameworks. Now, the other great thing about JavaScript is that it's the one language that is supported by all of the major browsers. While you can use other languages that can be compiled into JavaScript and run on the browser, it is still the language that powers the web. And this is evident from the popularity of JavaScript. So this is a graph that's compiled by RedMonk, and this is for January 2018. And you can see that at the top right corner, the most popular language of 2018 is still JavaScript, closely followed by Java. So whenever students ask me, what is the language that I should learn first? Or what is the best programming language to become skilled in? I tend to tell them that, well, that depends on what you want to build. If you want to build an iOS app, then that means you should learn Swift. If you want to build an Android app, then you need to know about Java. But if you want to build websites and web apps, then JavaScript is going to be your close ally. Although if you're not careful, it can also be your enemy. So in the coming lessons, we're going to learn about best practice in terms of using JavaScript and all of the good parts that this language offers. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.